as the United States presses forward with President Donald Trump's 20-point Gaza peace plan. Israel's far-right factions are moving the opposite direction, reviving calls to annex the occupied West Bank. The move exposes growing tensions between Washington's efforts to stabilize the region and the hardline ambitions within Israel's political establishment. We see that President Trump's swift rejection of the annexation proposal signals not only Washington's determination to preserve the fragile Gaza ceasefire, but also to highlight the delicate optics of U.S.-Israel relations at a time when regional diplomacy is being tested. As we dive into the details, these and more will be explored in today's Flash News. Good afternoon and welcome. I am Tabitha Arko. Let's begin. United States President Donald Trump has dismissed moves by some Israeli lawmakers to advance the annexation of the occupied West Bank, reaffirming Washington's opposition to any such action. Let's take a look.
The West Bank is, don't worry about the West Bank. Israel's not going to do anything with the West Bank, okay? Don't worry about it. Is that your question? They're not going to do anything with the West Bank. Don't worry about it. Israel's doing very well. They're not going to do anything with it.
President Trump right there when asked if Israel is planning to annex the West Bank. But recently, a bill seeking to apply Israeli law to the West Bank, a step considered tantamount to annexation, received preliminary approval in the Knesset on Wednesday. The measure was sponsored by far-right opposition members, including National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. Now, United States Vice President J.D. Vance, who visited Israel earlier in the week, said the administration had made it clear that annexation will not happen. He described the vote as a political provocation that risks undermining efforts to stabilize the region. What do you think about that? Is J.D. Vance saying what is actually real? Let's take a listen.
Look, if it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel. The policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel. That will continue to be our policy. And if people want to take symbolic votes, they can do that. But we certainly weren't happy about it.
Also, Secretary of State Marco Rubio also warned that annexation attempt could jeopardize the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, which has held for nearly 2 weeks under U.S. mediation. Senior U.S. officials, including Trump's advisor, Jared Kushner, are currently in Israel to support the truce and advance the president's 20-point Gaza plan aimed at reconstruction and a gradual path toward Palestinian statehood. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office denounced the parliamentary vote as a deliberate political provocation designed to create division during the U.S. visit. The ruling Lagou party did not back the proposal, signaling it was unlikely to progress further. The annexation bill passed its first reading by a narrow 25-24 margin in the 120-seat Knesset. It would still require 3 additional readings to become law. The West Bank, captured by Israel during the 1967 Middle East War, remains one of the most contested territories in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. More than 500,000 Israelis live in settlements considered illegal under international law, while Palestinians view the land as part of a future independent state. Regional powers, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Indonesia, and 13 other Muslim-majority nations, have condemned the bill, calling it a setback to peace effort. Multilateral Arab and Islamic organizations also criticized the move, urging Israel to halt actions that could derail negotiations toward a two-state solution. Now we see that Trump's Gaza plan seeks to sustain the ceasefire, to also ensure humanitarian access and expand normalization agreement known as the Abraham Accords to include Saudi Arabia. However, Riyadh has repeatedly said it will not normalize ties with Israel without a credible path to Palestinian statehood. Now, the current truce has seen limited prisoner exchanges, the release of hostages, and partial withdrawals of Israeli troops from Gaza. Despite sporadic violations, both sides have pledged to maintain the U.S.-brokered ceasefire, Hamas between Israel and Hamas. Now, moving over to Putin in Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin has dismissed the latest U.S. sanctions targeting Russia's oil industry as an unfriendly act that will not significantly harm the country's economy. The Trump administration announced the measures on Wednesday, citing Moscow's continued offensive in Ukraine. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the sanctions aim to pressure Russia to end what Washington called a senseless war. Putin, addressing reporters in Moscow, said the restrictions would only strain global energy markets and potentially drive up oil prices. He also added that Moscow remains open to dialogue with Washington despite what he described as escalating U.S. hostility. Putin has a statement. Let's take a listen.
Well, that's what we agreed upon. And now I am familiar with this statement. The President of the United States has decided to cancel or postpone this meeting. Rather, he is speaking about postponing this meeting. Well, what can I say? Dialogue is always better than any confrontation, than any disputes, or all the more so than war. Therefore, we have always supported this, the continuation of dialogue, and we support it now. Now, regarding the new sanctions, first of all, there is nothing new here. Yes, of course, they are serious for us, that is clear, and they will have certain consequences. But they will not significantly affect our economic well-being.
President Vladimir Putin appears unperturbed about the sanctions. But the sanctions come amid renewed tensions between the two countries following the cancellation of a planned summit between Putin and the United States President Donald Trump in Budapest. Putin suggested the meeting was postponed rather than cancelled and noted that the proposal had originated from Washington. The European Union has also moved to impose similar restrictions on Russian oil and gas exports, signaling growing transatlantic coordination against Moscow while pledging support for Ukraine. At the Brussels summit, von der Leyen had this to say. Let's take a look.
And we will keep up pressure on Russia for as long as it takes, just as we've always said that we will stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes to secure an end to the killing and a just and lasting peace. This was also today our message to President Zelensky.
While Putin is facing sanctions, the European Union have made a pledge that they are committed to supporting Ukraine. Trump called this for, he keeps calling for an end to the fighting in Ukraine. His administration continues to pressure both Kyiv and Moscow toward negotiations. He recently urged both sides to stop where they are, a stance European allies described as a starting point for peace talks rather than a concession to Russian advances. Meanwhile, the new United States sanctions are scheduled to take effect on November 21. The move underscores Washington's attempt to tighten economic pressure on Moscow while maintaining diplomatic space for future talks. Yet, with Putin warning of possible market disruptions and global oil dependency still high, could these measures deepen economic instability instead of curbing Russia's war ambitions? What does this mean for Russia, as it poses a critical threat to the economy, even if Putin acts unperturbed and unconcerned? Now, moving over to Canada. Recently, in a new development, United States President Donald Trump on Thursday announced the termination of all trade negotiations with Canada, escalating tensions between the two countries following a controversial advertisement that used remarks from the late United States President Ronald Reagan criticizing tariffs. The advertisement, produced in Ontario, featured Reagan's 1987 comment condemning tariffs on foreign goods, portraying them as harmful to jobs and trade. The message, reportedly aimed at lending protectionist policies, appeared to have struck a nerve in Washington, and not just Washington, to Trump. Trump, who has long defended tariffs as a tool of economic leverage, reacted sharply, declaring on Truth Social that all trade discussions with Canada were terminated. Now, his decision halts weeks of bilateral talks on steel and aluminum, key sectors affected by mutual tariffs imposed earlier this year. But how far can political messaging, especially one rooted in historical context, reshape modern trade diplomacy? Just a week ago, Mark Carney was at the White House to ensure that there is a partnership between the U.S. and Canada. But what are the optics like? Now, moving over, this advertisement was confirmed, and this had caught the United States president's attention earlier in the week, saying it was meant to highlight the long-term economic cost of tariff wars. Yet, the Reagan Presidential Foundation criticized the Ontario government for selectively editing Reagan's remarks without authorization and warned it was reviewing legal options. But is that true? Let's take a look.
I even see foreign countries now that we are doing very well with taking ads. Don't go with tariffs. They're taking ads. I saw an ad last night from Canada. If I was Canada, I'd take that same ad also. But they're actually on television taking ads. But I do believe that everybody's too smart for.
The facts are clear. Trump just mentioned that. The Canadian federal government declined to comment on Trump's announcement. Analysts, however, warn that the decision could complicate ongoing regional economic cooperation, just as the United States, Canada, and Mexico prepare to review their 2020 Continental Free Trade Agreement next year. The move also raises broader questions about the politicization of trade policy. Economic strategies increasingly being shaped by media narratives rather than structured negotiation. In this case, Trump's trade policies have already pushed U.S. tariffs to their highest levels since the 1930s, disrupting markets and provoking retaliatory measures from allies and rivals alike. Economists caution that another round of tariff escalations could further strain North American supply chains and investors' confidence. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, addressing reporters on Thursday, said Ottawa would not grant unfair U.S. access to its markets should talks with Washington collapse. Now, as tensions deepen, observers say both sides face a diplomatic test. Can political pride give way to pragmatic compromise in the pursuit of economic stability? These are very close allies, the United States and Canada. Think about that. Now, moving over to Africa. Henrietta Lagou, presidential candidate and leader of the JP Pulse Party, concluded her campaign in Yapougon, Abidjan, pledging to bring inclusive leadership and renewed hope to Ivorians as she bids to become the country's first female president. The former minister under ex-president Laurent Gbagbo drew a large crowd in one of Abidjan's most populous districts, where she emphasized reconciliation, youth empowerment, and economic inclusion as pillars of her campaign. Her message resonated strongly among women and unemployed youth, who view her candidacy as a chance for change. Lagou's campaign has focused on building grassroots support in working-class neighborhoods where economic hardship and unemployment remain key issues. Analysts say her growing popularity in these communities could signal a shift in voter sentiment ahead of the polls. Supporters describe her as a leader of integrity and intellect who understands the struggles of ordinary citizens. Many believe her leadership could prioritize social welfare, particularly for widows, small business owners, and young graduates struggling to find jobs. As the election approaches, Lagou's bid represents a historic test of whether Ivory Coast is ready to elect a woman to the nation's highest office. The outcome could redefine political representation and gender inclusion in the West African nation's democracy. This is the move we're seeing right here in Africa, and not just in Ivory Coast, over too in Namibia. Until next time, this is where we'll be drawing the curtain on today's Flash News. Stay tuned for Horizon at the top of the hour, 6 p.m.